Okay, let's look at our content browser down here. I'm going to get back to that tool. Let's look at our content browsers down here. Now, as part of showing you this, I'm also going to show you this entire layout is adaptable. You can grab things, you can pick them up, and you can slide them away. Like the World Outliner, I can grab it, and I can put it basically anywhere I would like it to go. In this particular case, I'm going to put it back up there. I can also rechange the size of that. The same thing with your content browser or your modes. You can customize your layout. You're going to need to see this down here. Generally, I like to keep it on the bottom and keep it as big as possible. But I always end up having to make adjustments to it as we go, just because most of your worlds are going to have a lot of things in there, and you need to see everything in the way it's all set up. I also try to keep myself as organized as possible. This is not organized, what I'm showing you right here, because I only have this one object in here. In fact, let's go back to the original object. I just have one object here in my scene, and it has one material that is made up of two textures. So it's a very, actually this is made up of two textures, with two textures or two materials, and then one texture in each material. So that's really all there is in here, and there's not a whole lot to keep organized, but I'll show you how to do that. Your content browser down here shows you all of the things that you have in your world. Now remember, we started out with a blank world here. Had I chosen one of the other game levels to create, or if I had chosen the content that goes with it, I would have 4 or 5 folders down here. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new level to show you everything that's down here. So I'm going to pause this for a moment, and then I'm going to come back. Okay, and we're back. So what I have here is I've got the, I opened up an example of the third-person map. There's a third-person guy down here. You can see there are some objects that are in here. And then down here in my content browser, you're going to see that there are some other elements down here that we didn't have a second ago. If I go in to play this one, I am a third person. I can run around. I can jump using a space bar. Your WASD keys all work. And there's collision. I can't run through the wall. I can't run through objects because they all have collision on them, although you notice I can go up staircases. Although I'm really not going up the staircase, but you'll see how that works. The sky and everything is the same. All right. Now, the content browser is where everything is stored that's in your game level. So in this particular instance down here, I've got 2 folders under my content. One of them is third person BP. That stands for blueprint. That's that guy right there. He is a third person blueprint. Everything about him is contained in here. His animations, the blueprints that make him up, the character model itself, which includes the mesh, which is what you actually see on the screen. It includes the textures. The textures are the images that make up a material. And then the materials that you see that are applied to him in this particular case, it doesn't look like a material, but it actually is. He has a logo on him and things like that. All right. And then I also have one called maps, and I have one called meshes. Now maps, and there's the basic meshes that you can see that I have in this scene. The map is kind of an interesting thing. This is a project. When you open up a new thing in Unreal, like if I go back over here and I look at this back up over here, these are projects. All right. Now, within a project, you have a map, and a map contains everything about that you want it to be a part of that game. You can have multiple maps within a game. You can have, you can create a single project, and then what you can do is you can say, well, I want my game is going to take place in 2 different worlds. I want an exterior world, and I want an interior world. I want an exterior world that I will wander around streets, and I can go up to some doors, and I can go inside of a particular door, and then when I step through that doorway, I am in an interior space in that building. Well, you really can't build a world that is so big and so complicated. It contains both exteriors and interiors. And much like a movie, they have different scenes. And so you think of a map as a scene. One map would be a scene where it is a street scene, and I've got various buildings that I can walk up to, can't necessarily go into them. But one of the doors I can go into, and then I would enter a different map and jump to that map, or jump to that scene, and that would be in an interior part of it. That way, I'm only dealing with a particular map that only has the interior spaces that I need to worry about, not all the exterior stuff. And the exterior map has all of the exterior props, but none of the interior props, so I can keep everything as clean as possible. Maps are easy to create, and I'll show you how to do that when we actually start creating levels. But that's kind of what a map is. Meshes are all of the basic models. We call them assets, but they are in essence a mesh model created in a 3D program, and then they're brought in. They're all very simple, and they don't really have any textures on them. We also have one called starter content. Now, starter content is what we didn't have the first time around. What this has in it is, you can see if I click on starter content, I've got a whole bunch of folders in here. I've got some architecture, which contains things like doorways. And if I grab on that and bring it out here, or a window, I think this one's a doorway. I've got things where I've got some pre-made shapes, and if I go in and run around, I've got a doorway here, and I can run through the doorway. Can't run through the wall. I can't get that wall, but I might be able to, I think I can actually climb through that window. You can't get through there, but that's the architectural stuff that's in there, just for doing some basic elements. You've got audio. There's some basic audio in here. Things like the collapse sound, which would, I'm assuming you can hear that, but it's the sound of like something falling or crashing down, or an explosion. Things like that are pre-built in there that you can do things with them as you want. Blueprints. There's a light blueprint that has a light switch on it, and I talked about blueprints in an earlier video. This is a case of a light that has a switch attached to it, so you can take the light and put it in there, and then you do something and it turns the light on or turns it off, and you can use it anywhere you want to, as many times as you want. You got some HDRI. We'll talk about HDRI later. Just know that what that is, and I don't think I can double click and bring it up, but what that actually is an exterior world. It's a specialized photograph that contains things like light sources and stuff like that. It's extremely high quality, and this is what we use for reflections. So we'll have some reflections in there. I got a folder of maps. In this particular case, I've got 3 different maps. I've got a starter map, which is where we are. I have a minimal default and an advanced lighting map. If I double click on a map and open it up, I'm not going to save that stuff there. This is what it looks like. And you can see that there's stuff going on. I just died there. But there's that HDRI image in the background that we use for a background image, and also for reflections and things like that. And this is just designed to show off the different types of reflections that you have in there. Then you have minimal default, which is this. This is just 2 chairs, a table, and a little statue right here sitting on a ground plane. And it's kind of a nice place to start with sometimes too. These 2 are included every time you create a basic level. You're going to get those, and then the starter map looks like where we were to begin with the little, I'm sorry, I lied. This is the starter map. This just kind of shows you everything that's in here, all the different textures and everything that you might want to have, or you might want to use. And that third person map back down over here was where I was actually a second ago. So this one's in here. You can just see the different types of effects. And I think I'll leave this here for a second, just so I can talk about all the other things, and you can see them all represented in here. The materials, these are all the pre-made materials that are in here. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to make these bigger so you can see them. These are all the materials that are pre-built into there, and they're all really, there's metals, there's woods, there's rock, stone, there's slate as opposed to granite, as opposed to sandstone, different types of wood. You've got an animated water, you've got one for the ocean, one for a lake that has ripples and everything already built into it. You got one here that has a glowing, illuminated impulse to it. You got all these things. These are all pre-made, pre-built, and you can use them anywhere you want. And we'll be creating new ones as we go. Particle systems. These are fun. We're going to have a whole section on particle system. When we open these things up, I'll bring it over here so you can see it. This is what particle fire looks like. And we're going to go back in and we're going to create our own fire systems and get them to work the way we want. There's also one just for smoke, which is hard to see, but it's taking place right there. Against that background, it's really hard to see. You've got props. There's your basic props. The chairs, there's a bench, there's a couple of lamps, there's this weird looking preview for materials, there's a rock, there's some steps, there's a little statue, a window. All of these things are in here that we can pick up and use, and they all come with their own set of materials that pertain just to those objects. Shapes, these are your primitives. And you can use these and assemble these together and whatever you want. These are pre-made assets. These are not brushes. They're not the BSP geometry that we saw up above. These are actually made in a 3D program and brought in, and you can use them to create, planners around the base of trees or donuts or rings, or you can actually build a key. We're going to build a key using the parts of these things in here, like a skeleton key, those types of things that are all in here. And then we have textures, and textures and materials go together. A material, which is what can be applied to something. If I go back in here, and let's go back to our original map. And I've got a few minutes left here. This is going to go back to our original map here. If I then go back up to my materials and say, well, I'd like to maybe make the ground be something different, I'm going to grab that, I'm going to drag it out and let go of it, and you can see it gets to be huge. All right, because this material is set up to go on something much larger than that. And what I can do is, if I would like that to be different, I'm going to have to go in and work on my material. Materials look like this. It's really frightening when you first start out, but trust me, they're actually not that difficult to do. They can get difficult if you would like them, but for the most part, these are all fairly simple connections of images that are all linked together using various types of algorithms, and they're all plugged into a base material here, which is then creates that. And I can create new materials or variations on materials, or I can create something called an instance material that can contain variables that I can turn on and turn off based upon what I would like to apply it to. It can look like this to begin with, but I can set it up to where at the click of a button I can change out the brick, or I can make it look older, or I can make it look not so weathered, or I can do all kinds of things at the click of a button in there and do those kinds of things that are always set up. I can do an instance material. I can also do one that contains sounds. You notice if I go in here and run around, you can't hear any footsteps. If I jump, I think the volume is really low on this one, but if I jump up in the air, it makes a sound, and when I land, it makes a sound, but there's no footstep sounds. That's actually added into a material. So what I can do is I can set a material or a scene so my character has to run down, let's say he's running down a hallway, and he's running on tile. But he'll get one set of footprint sounds while he's on that tile material. If he steps on a metal grate material, the footstep will change to a metallic sound. So I can do those kinds of things, and I can add those into materials. Materials we're going to have some fun with creating these. We're going to have a whole unit on just creating materials and working with them and understanding how they all work. Particles, props, shapes, and textures. And that's it. A texture is what it goes into a material. So a material is made up of textures. So in this particular case, I've got here brick clay. I've got a diffuse color. I have a metallic color. And I have something called normals. And we'll talk about these. We'll actually be making some of these things in class so you can learn how to deal and make new materials. This is what makes it look three-dimensional. This is what makes it look shiny, and this is what gives it its basic albedo, which is what we refer to as a diffuse color. So this is the material you see. These two things are what make it look different. And so almost everything we do is going to have a normal map, which is going to make it look three-dimensional, and almost everything has a metallic map of some sort that controls the shininess or the reflectivity or the glossiness of something. And we'll be dealing with that later on. So this all has been a 5-part introduction to the basic layout. We'll go through things in more detail as we go along, but I hope that these have helped you, and look back for these to get some more information a little bit later on. Thanks.